Hey everyone, and welcome to today's video lecture. And in today's video lecture, I'll be solving previous year's NEET questions and discussing the answers. As you can see on your screen, just for the chapter Neural Control and Coordination, we are in part 3 of the series. So you haven't watched part 1 and 2, so please go and do so. All right, and let's begin. Let me change the pen. Yeah. Okay, so we are in question number 1. The nerve centers which control the body temperature and the urge for eating are contained in, this appeared in the year 2010. Okay, let's go through our options. A. Hypothalamus, B. Pons, C. Cerebellum, and D. Thalamus. Okay, so the part which controls body temperature and the urge for eating are hypothalamus. Okay, answer is A. We've already discussed this in part 2 and I've given a very detailed answer for this. All right. Let's go through the discussion. So hypothalamus is responsible for thermoregulation. It is basically the same answer that I had given in the previous part. So I will not go through this so much in detail. Okay, so the preoptic area is responsible of the anterior hypothalamus. Okay, so if they ever ask you posterior anterior hypothalamus, you should know. Okay, so the preoptic area of the anterior hypothalamus is responsible for thermoregulation. So there are heat sensitive neurons and about 1/3 of them are cold sensitive neurons. Again, they are known to function as temperature sensitive neurons. So I will not discuss this. Area is heated, the skin breaks into sweat and the blood vessels dilate and any excess body heat production is inhibited. So this is one part, okay? This is one function, I mean to say. So thermoregulation is one function. So there's cardiovascular regulation also, where it controls the arterial pressure and heart rate. There's regulation of body water, which controls it creates a sensation of thirst as well as secretes ADH based on the situation. And yeah, it also the supraoptic nuclei of the hypothalamus becomes stimulated when there's an increase in concentration of electrolytes. Okay. Then you have regulation of uterine contraction, milk ejection from breasts. All right, so that controls oxytocin. It also stimulates the myoepithelial cells of the surrounding alveoli in the breast to secrete milk. Then, yeah, the urge of eating, that's gastrointestinal and feeding regulation. Okay, so the center that causes desire for hunger is located in the lateral hypothalamic area. Okay, so when a person is hungry, it searches out for food, right? So that is present in the hypothalamus. And the ventromedial medial nuclei contains a satiety center. Satiety center is when you are full, when you're feeling full, you've eaten enough food. Even if food is kept in front of you, you feel indifferent towards it. Okay, so that is satiety. That is also present in the hypothalamus. So the urge for eating, yes, that is present, that I've already discussed. It is in the hypothalamus. So endocrine hormone secretion also, yes, it secretes many stimulating and inhibitory hormones. Again, we will come across these functions when we study the endocrine system. Okay, and yeah, the blood supply to the anterior pituitary gland is supplied by the lower part of the hypothalamus, which controls the release of anterior pituitary gland hormones. All right. So basically, I have already covered this in part 2. I didn't want to spend too much time on this. But to answer your question, let's go back to the question. Yeah. The nerve centers which control the body temperature and the urge for eating are contained in hypothalamus. Okay, so I've already mentioned which part of the hypothalamus is responsible for what action. Okay. So clear, this was pretty simple, right? We'll move on to the next question. If you like, you can note this information down in your notebooks because I've compiled all the functions of hypothalamus in this slide. Okay. All right, question number 2. Which part of human brain is concerned with the regulation of body temperature? Okay, this appeared in 2009. Again, body temperature. Let's go through our options. We've already discussed this in question 1. A, the cerebellum. B, cerebrum. C, hypothalamus. D, medulla oblongata. Okay, so it is C, hypothalamus. Okay, very obvious. So we already discussed this in question 1. So your answer should be C. Okay, if you like, you can solve the questions along with me. You can feel free to pause the video, write down your answer, what you think is the right answer, and then come back to this video and see the discussion. Okay, to see if you've got it right. So it'll help you practice your questions. Again, it's the same answer, so I've just given you a brief. Hypothalamus of the brain is concerned with the regulation of body temperature. Okay, so just imagine your body is set at a particular temperature all the time. Okay, that's 37 degrees Celsius. Okay, and it's like a thermometer which is set at the same temperature. So the hypothalamus role is to maintain that body temperature. Okay, all right, clear. Let's move on. And we've seen also in the previous slide how that is done, what part of the hypothalamus is responsible for that. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Okay, question number 3. Third ventricle of brain is also known as, this appeared in 1990, quite an old question. A, metacele. B, rhinocele. C, paracele. And D, diacele. Okay, so third ventricle of the brain is called as diacele. Okay, the answer is D. Okay, let's go to the discussion. So third ventricle of the brain is diacele. It's also written as DIO in the textbook which I found. And so this is the diagram. So the ventricles are actually cavities in the brain. Okay, you can see all these spaces here, the cavities in the brain. Now, in these cavities, there is a liquid present here called CSF, which is known as cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, it's called as cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, now cerebrospinal fluid is a fluid which it cushions your brain. Okay, it protects the brain from trauma. Also, it helps in transportation of nutrients. Okay, it removes all the wastes from the brain. So CSF plays a very important role. Okay, and it is secreted here in this ventricles. Okay, so you can see the lateral ventricle, paracele. You have 1, you have 2. Okay, so the third ventricle over here is diacele, 3. Okay, and then you have the cerebral aqueduct in between, and then you have the fourth ventricle, which is myelocele. Okay, in the hindbrain. All right, so I would suggest you remember these names. If at all, if a question like that does appear in the exam, you know what it is. But this is a very old question, 1990. Unfortunately, this information is not there in NCERT, so I don't know if it will appear in NEET or not. But for the sake of the exam, and if you would like to study, I would suggest you can note down the names of the ventricles. Okay, clear. If you go back to our question, yeah, the third ventricle of the brain is known as diacele. Okay, clear. Let's move on then. Okay, so question number 4. Destruction of the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord will result in loss of, and this appeared in 2015. A, commissural impulses. B, integrating impulses. C, sensory impulses. And D, voluntary motor impulses. Okay, so destruction of the anterior horn cells will result in loss of voluntary motor impulses. Okay, so your answer is D. Okay, let's go to the discussion. Okay, so destruction of the horn cell of the spinal cord will result in loss of voluntary motor impulses. So if you look at the transverse section of the spinal cord, so this is a transverse section, TS. Okay, so if you have this spinal cord, you cut it in between. So what you see from top, this is what it looks like. Okay, so you have the anterior root of spinal nerve. This is where the motor neurons Okay, exit from. Okay, this is where the posterior root is where the sensory nerve fibers come in. Okay, so sensory nerve fibers are sending signals and indicating the motor neurons to do their job. Okay, to contract the muscles. So just imagine if you touch a hot plate, okay, and you immediately move your hand away, right? So sending a signal to your fingers to contract. Okay, your muscles to contract and move away. So also it will be that's a reflex. Okay, so this in this case is voluntary motor impulses also. If you want to move your hand or anything like that, this sends a signal to that. Okay, clear? If we go back to our question, destruction of the anterior horn cells of spinal cord result in loss of voluntary motor impulses. Okay, this you should know. All right, this is part of the functions of spinal cord. Clear? Let's move on then. Okay, question number 5. Which one of the following is the example of the action of the autonomous nervous system? And this appeared in 2005. A. Swallowing of food. B. Pupillary reflex. C. Peristalsis of the intestine. D. Knee-jerk response. Okay, so now we are looking at the example of the action of the autonomous nervous system. Now, if you go through our options, you'll notice that there are 2 options which are correct. All right. And the answer here is pupillary reflex and peristalsis of the intestine. So the answer ideally should be B and C. Okay, this is autonomous. Both of them are controlled by autonomous nervous system. If you go to part 1, I've made a very nice table of all the parts of the organs of the body and in sympathetic and parasympathetic how they function. Okay, so let's go to the discussion. So pupillary reflex and peristalsis of the intestine are controlled by the autonomous nervous system. Okay, so we have sympathetic nervous system in autonomous as well as parasympathetic. Okay, so the pupillary reflex will be different in sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay, they'll dilate, they'll constrict. Even in the case of peristalsis of the intestine, the motility of the intestine will be stopped in sympathetic and it will be increased in parasympathetic. So like I said, go back to part 1 and go through that table. It will be very helpful because I've tried to compile all the organs and their functions or the effect of the stimulation in sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay, so that will be helpful for you. Okay, so yeah, so I've answered the question. So example of the action of the autonomous nervous system. Yeah, so there are 2 answers to this: pupillary reflex and peristalsis of the intestine. Okay, so we'll move on. Okay, so question number 6. Ivan Pavlov performed experiments on, okay, and this appeared in 1993. A. Simple reflexes, B. Conditioned reflexes, C. Cardiac reflexes, and D. Origin of life. So Ivan Pavlov performed experiments on conditioned reflexes. Okay, the answer is B. Okay, let's go to the discussion. Ivan Pavlov performed experiments on conditioned reflexes. So Ivan Pavlov was actually a Russian physiologist. Okay, and he's particularly known for his experiments on conditioned reflexes. Okay, so based on all the work that he has done throughout his life, he is mainly known for these experiments that he did on conditioned reflexes. Now, what are conditioned reflexes? Okay, they are acquired in life. They are such reflexes that are acquired in life. They are depend on previous experiences. They can be established or abolished. They are not transmitted by heredity, and cortical and subcortical centers are responsible for that. Okay, so if you want to learn something or create a habit for something, these conditioned reflexes, you tend to what you do, you practice every day, and you learn that. You're conditioning your brain to learn a particular action, right? So those are conditioned reflexes. Now, he performed the very famous dog experiment Okay, and I will come to that. Okay, so here's a photo of that. You see the dog over here. Now what he does is, the dog looks at the food. Okay, he looks at the food, this visual representation of the food in front of him, and he looks at it. His brain stimulates that food he wants to eat it, so salivary glands begin to secrete saliva. Okay, and so in this case, this food is unconditioned. In this case, okay, the food is unconditioned. Now he places a condition. This is natural. Okay, you look at the food, your brain senses that it wants to eat it, and so the salivary gland begins to secrete saliva. So the dog salivates. Now he puts the condition of a bell. So every time the dog looks at that food, the bell rings. Okay, the bell rings, he feeds the dog. Okay, the bell rings, he feeds the dog. The bell rings, he feeds the dog. Okay, so every time the bell rings, he feeds the dog. The dog will look at the food at the time the bell rings, and he will look at the food, and he will not eat it, as in his brain will look at the food, and his salivary glands begin to salivate. Okay, so and then eventually he eats it. So every time the bell rings, and this is done over a period of time. Okay, over, let's say, 1 week, 2 week period. Okay, it's done over a period of time. Now the third case, okay, what he did is he removed the food. Now there's no food, but the bell still rings. Now the brain is conditioned in such a way that when the bell rings, automatically he starts salivating, even though there's no food in front of him. So the bell was the trigger. Okay, so over here what we see is the food was the unconditioned stimulus. Okay, there is no condition placed here, right? Salivation in response to the food is unconditioned response, right? There is no condition based on it. The salivation was normal. Okay, it was, he looked at the dog, looked at the food, he begins to salivate. The sound of the bell is conditioned now. What he did is, Ivan, he put the bell there. He would ring a bell. Every time the dog looked at the food, he would ring a bell. He would ring a bell. Okay, so the sound of the bell is the condition. And the salivation in response to the bell is conditioned response. Now see how the brain has changed. Okay, it is conditioned itself in such a way that every time the bell rings, you begin to salivate. Like that it happens, okay, when we begin to eat at a particular time. Okay, let's say 1 p.m. I have my lunch every day. Okay, and I do that every day over a period of time. Okay, at 1 p.m. I know. Now let's say I do this over a period of 2 weeks. Okay, every day I'm having lunch at 1 p.m. at 1 p.m. at 1 p.m. Now let's say on one particular day I don't get my lunch at 1 p.m. but I begin to feel hungry at 1 p.m. So my brain is now conditioned that at 1 p.m. I need food. Okay, that's what it is. So you can condition. It's like creating habits. It's like creating good habits. So what you do is you condition your mind. Similarly, what he did with the dog, he conditioned the dog into thinking that whenever the bell rings, you begin to salivate. Okay, so conditioned reflexes are helpful in learning good habits. If you want to inculcate good habits in you, so you begin to condition your mind. Okay, you can even abolish them if you want to. You can acquire them, okay, based on your need. Okay, so this is the famous dog experiment that he did. Interesting, right? If a question like that appears in NEET, you know what the answer is now. Okay, so let's revise. The food was, like I said, unconditioned stimulus, right? And the salivation in response to that food was unconditioned response, right? He was presented with the food, he looked at the food, again the salivation happened, but now the condition was the bell. Every time he looked at the food, the bell would ring. Okay, every time he looked at the food, the bell would ring. Okay, the sound of the bell is now conditioned stimulus, and the response to the sound of the bell, that means the salivation, again then became conditioned response. Okay, now when there was no food, still the dog salivated. So now the brain of the dog was conditioned into that. Okay, so clear? So good question. Ivan Pavlov, performed experiments on conditioned reflexes. Okay, so B is the right answer. All right, we'll move on to the next question then. Okay, question number 7. Match the following columns and select the correct option. So I have column 1 and column 2. Let's match them. We have A, organ of Corti. Organ of Corti is located on the basilar membrane. Cochlea. Cochlea is the coil part of the labyrinth. Eustachian tube connects middle ear and pharynx. Stapes attached to the oval window. Okay, so these are parts of the ear. Clearly, you can see that. So you have A4. Okay, here for that A4. You have B2. Yes. You have a C1. And you have D3. Oops. D3. Now this appeared in NEET 2020. It's quite recent. Your answer is C. Clear? Let's go to the discussion. Okay, so you have the parts on both these diagrams are taken from NCERT. So no excuse, okay, for not knowing them. So you can see stapes here, the oval window, right? You have the eustachian tube here. You have the cochlea here. Over here you have the organ of Corti, okay, in the cochlea. Okay, clear? Basically you need to know the anatomy of the ear. If you knew the diagram well, you knew how everything was placed, it was easy to answer the question. This is quite an easy question, right? We'll move on then. Okay, question number 8. Which of the following statements is correct? This appeared in NEET 2019. A. Cornea consists of dense matrix of collagen and is the most sensitive portion of the eye. Cornea is an external, transparent and protective proteinaceous covering of the eyeball. C. Cornea consists of dense connective tissue of elastin and can repair itself. D. Cornea is convex, transparent layer which is highly vascularized. So you have to find the correct statement. So in this case, A is the right answer. Okay, cornea consists of dense matrix of collagen and is the most sensitive portion of the eye. Answer is A. Let's go to the discussion. So cornea is made up of dense connective tissue. In NCERT, it says dense connective tissue. Now this dense connective tissue is actually collagen. Okay. So here you have the structure of the eye and this is cornea. Okay, this is cornea. Cornea forms a part of the sclera. So sclera moves and in front it forms this cornea over here. Okay. Now if you go back to the question, option B also seems familiar. Okay, cornea is an external, transparent, protective, proteinaceous covering of the eyeball, but it's not completely accurate. Okay, actually sclera is the outer portion. Ideally, it should be A. Cornea consists of dense matrix of collagen. Okay, it does not contain elastin, and cornea, actually choroid is highly vascularized, not the cornea. Okay, so choroid is highly vascularized. Corneal transplants take place, right? So they don't have any vascularization over there. So yeah, for your answer, to answer your question, yes, cornea consists of dense matrix of collagen. Again, it's the most sensitive portion of the eye. So please be careful when you're answering these questions, okay? They could be tricky. Because A and B seemed a little, kind of familiar. You could have chosen A if you didn't know that it is made of collagen. In NCERT, it says particularly dense connective tissue, but which dense connective tissue, we don't know. So it's called collagen. Okay, we'll move on then. Okay, question number 9. Which of the following statements is not correct? Okay, not correct. This appeared in Orissa NEET 2019. A. An action potential in an axon does not move backward because the segment behind is in a refractory phase. Yes. B. Depolarization of hair cells of cochlea results in the opening of the mechanically gated potassium ion channels. Yes. C. Rods are very sensitive and contribute to daylight vision. No. D. In the knee jerk reflex, stimulus is the stretching of muscle and response is its contraction. Yes. So your incorrect statement is C. Okay, rods are very sensitive. Yes, that's true. But they contribute to nighttime vision. Okay, so answer is C. Okay, we will go to the discussion. So rods have a chemical cascade that amplifies at even a small photon of light. And hence, due to its high sensitivity, they contribute to nighttime vision. Okay. Cones are 30 to 300 times less sensitive than rods and function in brighter light. Okay, so whenever there is low lighting, okay, rods tend to help you adapt to that situation as compared to cones. Now cones have photopigments that have red, blue and green. Okay, so whenever there's bright light, like now I'm sitting in a lighted room, I can see the colors, right? So cones help me detect those details. You know, when I look at a particular flower or a fruit, you know, in particular detail, I can see the finer details of that particular object, right? Like this pen, I can see the finer details of this pen, okay, in this brighted room. The cones help me do that. Now cones are very less sensitive as compared to rods, okay, because cones need more light, right? Rods don't need so much light. So rods, even a small photon of light also is helpful for rods to help you understand. So when you are in a dark room, let's say, okay, when you're in a dark room, rods help you determine between black and white, right? When you look at a black and white picture, or you know, or you're in a black and white setting, just imagine if you didn't have cones in your eye. Okay, you didn't have cones in your eye, you only had rods, your whole world will look like black and white, right? So even if like a small amount of light would help you determine between the lighted portion, and the dark portion of that picture or that world or that room that you are looking at. Okay, so that is why rods help in the nighttime vision and cones help in the daylight vision, right? Okay, so here what you see, this is a nice curve. It's called the dark adaptation curve. For those who want to know, I've taken this from Guyton, this graph here. So here you see on your y-axis is retinal sensitivity and here minutes in dark. So just imagine if a person has stood outside in the light and sunlight, or in a well lighted room for many hours. Okay, and suddenly he or she is put into a dark room. Okay, suddenly he or she is put into a dark room. Now your eyes generally, you know that you personally experienced it, your eyes tend to adjust to that darkness, right? Initially it takes time, but then as you sit in the dark room for many hours, okay, you tend to adjust more comfortably. So what happens is, immediately if a person has been outside in the sunlight and has come into a dark room, okay, immediately the cones begin to adapt. Now cones are faster in adaptation as compared to rods. Okay, that's how it is designed. Cones generally tend to adapt faster as compared to rods. So just let's say within 1 minute in the dark, already it is 10 times sensitive. That's how fast it is. Okay, that's how fast it is. As soon as you enter, cones begin to adapt to that situation. But the sensitivity doesn't last long. You see there's a drop here in the curve. Okay, within like 10 minutes, the cones, they don't last for that long. Cones stop adapting to that situation. It's the rods which then help you. Rods are slower in functioning, in adapting to the situation. Okay, so as you sit in the dark room for many hours, now let's say 40 minutes, almost 40, more than 40 minutes in the dark, Just imagine the sensitivity of the rod has increased to almost 10,000 times, okay, as compared to cones. The sensitivity of the rods have increased to 10,000 times just 40 minutes in the dark room. Okay, so the rods, as you sit in the dark room for a longer period of time, your rods begin to adjust to the situation. Okay, so that's how rods help in the nighttime vision. It specifically helps in nocturnal animals who roam around at night looking for food. They hunt for food in the wild. So for them, it's very helpful for them. But for humans, like we're talking about human eye. In this case, we're talking about human eye. The rods take time to sensitize to that situation. Okay, but the sensitivity is so high as compared to cones. Okay, that's like I said previously, that a small photon of light is also enough for rods to perform that chemical cascade and then break down and show you an image. Okay, it sends the neuronal signal. We'll come to this later as and when I'm solving the question, because I've given a very detailed answer to that. As soon as you enter a dark room, they tend to adjust to that. Cones immediately adjust, but the sensitivity is not too good. That's why cones are very good when you have a bright lighted room or in the sunlight where you can see colors, right? But when you're in a dark room, rods help you do that, right? So to answer your question, rods are very sensitive. Yes, they are very sensitive, and they contribute to, it's not daylight, it's nighttime vision specifically. If it was cones, yes, cones are less sensitive as compared to rods, but they help in the daylight vision. Clear? Okay, so there was a question about the ear, right? What was the question? I think, yeah, depolarization of hair cells of cochlea results in the opening of the mechanically gated potassium ion channels, which is correct, and I'll show you how that happens. So there are stereocilia, okay, hair, like small cells, okay, stereocilia cells are present on the hair cells, okay, and each hair cell has 100 stereocilia. So if this was your hair cell, okay, so there are here stereocilia cells over here, but they're not all of the same size. Actually, they're not all of the same size. They vary in size. Let's say, let me erase this part. Say longer over here, then they'll decrease in height. But they attach together via filaments. They attach together via filaments. So these become longer on the side of the hair cell away from the modulus. Don't worry about these names. It's a structure in the ear, in the inner ear. The shorter cilia attach to thin filaments to their adjacent cilia from the backside. Like I said, there are filaments present over here and they attach, okay, to that cilia on the stereocilia on the longer side, like that. So when cilia are bent in the direction of the longer one, smaller cilia are tugged outward from the surface of the hair cell. Obviously, so when cilia are bent in this direction, obviously this will also get tugged. It's like tugging towards it. So they jut out from there, right, from the surface of the hair cell. Now when that happens, this causes mechanical transduction. You saw in the question mechanically gated channel, it's called mechanical transduction. Now what is mechanical transduction? When a mechanical stimulus gets converted into an electrochemical stimulus. That's called mechanical transduction. Okay, so what you see, mechanically gated potassium ion channel is a very simple way of stating it. What's actually happening is this mechanical pull, okay, is activating those potassium ion channels there. Okay, so what this mechanical transduction does, it causes mechanical transduction of 200 to 300 potassium gated channels and allow the flow of ions from the scalar media to the stereocilia, causing depolarization. So this is what's actually happening here. I just wanted you to understand this. Okay, so here you see the modulus over here, modulus, sorry, and you see the hair cells, you see the stereocilia over here, so they get pulled. Okay, and so this pulling allows for mechanical transduction to happen. That means 200 to 300 potassium gated channels then allow the flow of ions from the scala media to the stereocilia. Okay, so this is what's happening. Clear? So if we go back to our question, yeah, depolarization of hair cells or cochlea results in the opening of the mechanically gated potassium ion channels. So if this is a neat question and this unfortunately is not present in NCERT, please note it down. It may be helpful for you in understanding the actual functions of the ear. Okay, we'll move on to the next question then. Okay, question number 10. Which of the following receptors are specifically responsible for maintenance of balance of body and posture? This appeared in Orissa NEET 2019. Okay, so you have to find the receptors. Okay, so you have A, basilar membrane and otoliths. You have B, hair cells and organ of Corti. C, tectorial membrane and macula. And D, crista ampullaris and macula. So you have to find the receptor that responds for maintenance of balance of body and posture. So clearly it is D. These are the receptors that are responsible for balance of body. So your answer is D. Okay, let's go to the discussion. Okay, so you have the membranous labyrinth, which contains this crista ampullaris. It contains the semicircular canals here. You can see here. It has the utricle and the saccule over here. So you see the red portion over here. Okay, so these are the receptors, the crista ampullaris of the semicircular canal. That's how they are placed. Okay, and you have the macula, statocornea. Don't worry about that's also part of the macula. It forms the top layer over here, but don't worry about that. So you see the macula, yeah, over here and over here of the utricle and the saccule. Okay, so here is a close-up diagram. Okay, I've taken these diagrams from Guyton. Okay, these are the close-up diagrams of crista ampullaris, and this is the macula. Okay, so this is what it looks like. So to answer your question, yes, they asked for receptors specifically. Okay, they asked for receptors, so clearly it is crista ampullaris and macula. All right, so clear. This was direct if you knew your topic very well. This could have been an easy question to answer. Okay. Okay, question number 11. The transparent lens in the human eye is held in its place by, and this appeared in NEET 2018. Okay. A, ligaments attached to the ciliary body. B, ligaments attached to the iris. C, smooth muscles attached to the iris. D, smooth muscles attached to the ciliary body. So we are looking for the transparent lens in the human eye, and it's held in its place by ligaments attached to the ciliary body. So we're looking, anything that is held in place is held by ligaments, right? Anything that's held in place is held by ligaments. The only thing that you had to know was the anatomy of the eye. So the lens is attached by the ligaments of the ciliary body. Okay, over here. So your answer is A. We'll go to the discussion. Okay, so the eyeball contains a transparent crystalline lens, which is held in place by ligaments attached to the ciliary body. Yeah. So you see the ciliary body over here. You see the ligaments over here. You see the lenses over here, and this is the ligaments over here. Okay. So basically, this is it. This is how the eyeball is, the lens is positioned in the eye. Again, direct question, right? Wasn't very difficult to answer and appear in NEET 2018. This is taken from NCERT. So, not very difficult. Okay, so question number 12. Good vision depends on adequate intake of carotene-rich food. Select the best option from the following statements. Okay, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4. And select the best option. So this appeared in NEET 2017. Let's go through the statements. 1. Vitamin A derivatives are formed from carotene. 2. The photopigments are embedded in the membrane discs of the inner segment. 3. Retinal is a derivative of vitamin A. 4. Retinal is a light absorbing part of all the visual photopigments. Okay. So you have vitamin A derivatives are formed from carotene, which is correct. 2. The photopigments are embedded in the membrane discs of the inner segment. No, it's embedded in the membrane discs of the outer segment. Retinal is a derivative of vitamin A. Yes. Retinal is a light absorbing part of all the visual photopigments. Yes. So you have 1, 3 and 4. So your answer is A. Now if you notice, this appeared in NEET 2017, which is quite recent. But like let's say statement 2 is not specifically mentioned in NCERT. Okay, so you need to know this in more detail. And we'll come to that. So your answer is A, but the main part is the discussion, right? Let's go to the discussion. You can use elimination if you know this topic very, very well. Eliminate the wrong answers and choose the right ones. But if you really, really want to be very good at it and to know the topic in much detail, then you need to know this. Okay. We'll go to the discussion. So retinal is a vitamin A derivative from carotene. Okay, we studied this also in digestion and absorption, right? When we studied the minerals and the vitamins. Why vitamin A is necessary to avoid night blindness. The photopigments are embedded in the membrane discs of the outer segment. I bet you didn't know that, right? This is not there in NCERT, very clearly mentioned there. Okay, so the photopigments, whether it's the rods or the cones, they are embedded in the outer segment of the photopigment. Okay. Retinal is a derivative of vitamin A. Yeah, we know that. Retinal is the light absorbing part of rods and cones. Retinal is the light absorbing part of rods and cones. Again, this part and this part, these two statements, you should know or you will know only when you study the photochemistry of vision. Okay. So here is a diagram of what rods and cones look like. This specifically looks like a rod. Okay, but these are labels over here determine the functioning part of the rods and cones. Now what you see is the outer segment. Okay, you see now these are membrane discs. Okay, these are membrane discs. You have the mitochondria, you have the outer limiting membrane, which have the nucleus and the synaptic body. Okay, the nerve impulse passes through like that. Okay, these are the membrane shells lined with rhodopsin or color pigment. Okay, so what you see the outer segment and rhodopsin or photopsin, depending on whether you're talking about rods or cones, is present in the outer segment. Okay, this is the inner segment. So that statement was clearly incorrect. Retinal is the light absorbing part of rods and cones. Yes, retinal is the light absorbing part of rods and cones. When light is absorbed by, let's say, rods, okay, breakdown happens. Okay, rhodopsin breaks down. Okay, rhodopsin is made up of what? You should know this. At least you should know this much. Rhodopsin is made up of scotopsin. Scotopsin plus retinal. Okay, so when light falls on that, retinal is the light absorbing part of the rods and cones, okay, which causes the breakdown. We will again come to that. That's the photochemistry of vision. Okay, we will have to understand this in detail. Okay, because there are some questions in NEET, and they have appeared in NEET where they are, I guess, the examiner expected you to know that. Okay, so retinal is the light absorbing part of rods and cones. Okay, and photopigments are embedded in the outer segment. Okay, remember that. If we go back to the question, yeah, clearly 2 is incorrect. We have to select the best option, right? So vitamin A is a derivative form from carotene. Yes, retinal is a derivative of vitamin A. Retinal is a light absorbing part of all the visual photopigments. Okay, and this appeared in 2017. So this clearly means it's important. All right. So 1, 3, and 4 are the correct statement, the best options. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so question number 13. Choose the correct statement. Okay, let's go through our options. A. Nociceptors respond to changes in pressure. B. Meissner's corpuscles are thermoreceptors. C. Photoreceptors in the human eye are depolarized during darkness and become hyperpolarized in response to the light stimulus. D. Receptors do not produce gated potentials. This appeared in NEET 2016. Okay, so choose the correct statement. Nociceptors respond to changes in pressure. No, that's incorrect. Meissner's corpuscles are thermoreceptors. No, that's incorrect. Photoreceptors in the human eye are depolarized during darkness and become hyperpolarized in response to the light stimulus. That's correct. Receptors do not produce graded potentials. Sorry, that's incorrect. Your answer is C. We will come to this now. This is a very good question. This deserves a smiley face. Okay, like what I told you, right? When it comes to the photochemistry of vision, you need to understand that. Otherwise, you won't be able to answer this question as confidently as you should. Okay, so nociceptors are pain receptors. Okay, and detect damage occurring in the tissues. Okay, whether it is physical or chemical damage. Okay, so remember nociceptors are pain receptors. Okay, they detect the damage in the tissues. Now, Meissner's corpuscles are large encapsulated nerve ending of a large myelinated sensory nerve fiber. Okay, so they adapt quickly and are sensitive to movements on the surface of the skin and to low frequency vibrations. Okay, so whenever there are places where there's no hair, like the lips or the fingertips, okay, they're very sensitive. Okay, so they adapt quickly and they're quick to sensitize any motion that is there. Okay, whether it's a low frequency vibration also, and sensitive to movements on the surface of the skin. So this is what a Meissner's corpuscle looks like. You see this large encapsulated nerve fiber, right? Nerve ending of a large myelinated sensory nerve fiber. Okay, so this is what a Meissner's corpuscle looks like. Clear? Let's then go to the next discussion part. Okay. Yes, so now what I was talking about, photochemistry of vision. This is important to understand if you want to understand vision. Okay, now eye is not just what's present in NCERT. Yes, that's a very basic piece of information that they've given you, but there's a whole world, different world happening inside the eye. Okay, when you are visualizing, okay, a whole lot of chemical reactions are continuously happening. Okay, in NCERT it is present there. When you read the topic mechanism of vision, it is very briefly, but it is vague. Okay, so I wanted to explain this part to you properly so that you know what is actually happening. And so if you get a question like that, depolarization, hyperpolarization, you should know what is happening. Okay, so we know that rhodopsin, let's see, where is this part? Rhodopsin is the pigment present in rods. We are aware of that. We're talking about rods here. Okay, it's made up of scotopsin plus retinal. Okay, now you know rods are very sensitive to light, right? That's why they help in nighttime vision, specifically nighttime vision. Okay, as compared to cones. Now, when a small photon of light also enters, okay, the rods, that actually rhodopsin, not the rods, but the rhodopsin in the rods, they break down. Okay, they disintegrate. So what happens is the retinal part of rhodopsin, okay, the retinal part of rhodopsin decomposes in the presence of light to form all trans retinal from 11 cis retinal. Now this retinal that is present here actually is present in the form of 11 cis retinal. Okay, this is a potential MCQ. Okay, if they ask you what form of retinal is present in rods, it's 11 cis retinal. Okay, not all trans retinal. It gets converted to all trans retinol when light enters. Okay, when there's light stimulus given to rods. Okay, so rhodopsin that is present there, which is composed of scotopsin and retinal. And retinal is the light absorbing part. It is originally present in 11 cis retinal form. It gets converted to all trans retinal. Okay, gets converted to all trans retinal. Now, chemically, both of them are same, 11 cis retinal and all trans retinal, but physically they are different. Okay, 11 cis retinal is an angulated structure. Okay, but trans retinal is a straight form structure. Okay, it is not an angulated structure. So this changes the configuration of retinal. Now, once the configuration of retinal has changed, what happens? Scotopsin can't bind with all trans retinal. It can't bind with all trans retinal. Like, I can't bind with you. Okay, I could bind with 11 cis retinal because that was my form, my configuration fitted perfectly. But now, when light has come in, it causes the breakdown of rhodopsin. That means scotopsin and the retinal, they move away, they break away. And because 11 cis retinal gets converted to all trans retinal. Okay, and all trans retinal is a straight structure, whereas 11 cis retinal is an angulated structure. Okay, so scotopsin and the all trans retinal, they begin to move away, they break away. Okay, so what happens when they break away? A series of molecules are formed, one after the other. Okay, as in when more light is entering. Okay, quickly. Okay, it happens very quickly. This eventually forms meta-rhodopsin 2. Actually, before I go to that, let me show you the diagram. Yeah. Okay, so rhodopsin, when light energy enters, like I said, scotopsin plus retinal, right? It forms all trans retinal. That loosely bound scotopsin and all trans retinal is actually called bathoropsin. Where is this? Bathorodopsin. It's a very unstable structure. So it quickly gets converted to lumirodopsin. Lumirodopsin. Let's see lumirodopsin. I'll change the. Okay, so bathorodopsin is the first structure formed, then it gets converted to lumirodopsin. Bathorodopsin is a very unstable structure. Then it gets converted to lumirodopsin. Lumirodopsin is a little more stable than bathorodopsin. That's why it takes more time. Okay, it gets converted to meta-rhodopsin 1. Okay, meta-rhodopsin 1. And then that gets converted to meta-rhodopsin 2, which is quite a stable structure. So these compounds are being formed. Okay, these compounds are being formed. Okay, as and when scotopsin and all trans retinol move away from each other. Okay, first initially bathorodopsin is formed, then lumirodopsin is formed, then meta-rhodopsin 1 is formed. Eventually a more stable structure, meta-rhodopsin 2 is formed. Now meta-rhodopsin 2 is a very, very important structure. Why? Because it is called the activated rhodopsin. This is again a potential MCQ question. Just like that 11 cis retinal, like I told you. This is also a potential MCQ question. They can ask you what is activated rhodopsin, which form of rhodopsin actually is sending signals to the optic nerve. Okay, it is meta-rhodopsin 2. Meta-rhodopsin 2 is quite a stable structure as compared to batho-rhodopsin, which was initially formed. Okay, so meta-rhodopsin 2, sorry, then activates the cascade reaction to close the sodium gated channels in rods. Now, what does that mean? Okay, meta-rhodopsin 2, yes, has been formed. Now, this cascade is over. This series of reactions is done. Okay, and what happens is, uh, let me add one more thing. Okay, now meta-rhodopsin 2 is formed. Let's say if it has to be converted back to rhodopsin, what happens is, okay, so meta-rhodopsin 2 then splits into completely two different forms, scotopsin and all-trans retinol. Okay, now scotopsin to form rhodopsin again needs 11-cis retinol, not all trans retinol. Can't do anything with all trans retinol. It won't be able to combine. It forms a very unstable compound with trans retinol. So retinal isomerase is present there. Okay, an enzyme called retinal isomerase is present there, which converts all trans retinol into 11-cis retinol. So once 11-cis retinol is there, then scotopsin and 11-cis retinol form rhodopsin eventually. Okay, so this is to complete the whole cycle. But now what we're looking at is when meta-rhodopsin 2 is formed. Okay, meta-rhodopsin 2 is called the activated rhodopsin. Okay, and this then triggers the cascade reaction to close sodium gated channels in rods. Okay, we'll come to what that means. Change this. So, to give you a brief before I begin to explain, you saw a structure of the rod, the outer membrane, the outer segment and the inner segment, correct? Now the outer segment contains sodium channels, okay, and the inner segment contains potassium channels, and there's a sodium potassium ATP pump. Okay, sodium and here potassium. Okay, so here there are sodium gated channels, here there are potassium gated channels. So in the outer segment, what happens? This is normal. Okay, this is what happens normally. This is before any light stimulus has happened. Okay, sodium tends to enter, okay, and potassium leaves. Okay, sodium enters over here and potassium leaves. Okay, this is what it is. This is what is happening. Okay, so what happens is inside the nerve fiber, usually positive electropotential is maintained. Okay, positive electropotential is maintained. Okay, there are lots of sodium gated channels over here, there are lots of potassium channels over here, so sodium is continuously moving in, okay, and potassium is moving out, okay, and it is maintained, and this electropotentiality is maintained by the sodium potassium ATP pump. Okay, so this is normal. Now these sodium channels are controlled by cGMP, okay, cyclic GMP. Okay, these channels are controlled by cGMP. So if there's ever a change in cGMP, these channels will behave differently. Okay, these channels will behave differently. So now what happens? Okay, now I've seen you what a normal rod looks like. Okay, a rod, how it functions. Okay, a normal nerve fiber of a rod is functioning this way. There are lots of sodium ions entering, potassium ions are leaving from there. Sodium potassium pump is maintaining that positivity inside. Okay, electropositivity inside. Let me erase this part. Okay, now photoreceptors hyperpolarize in response to stimuli. Now how does that happen? In the case of rods, in the presence of light, it decomposes rhodopsin, which then we saw the decomposition of rhodopsin, right? Which finally forms meta-rhodopsin 2. Now that activates G protein transducin. Okay, it's a diagram here over here. Yeah. So this decomposition of rhodopsin happens because of light, right? Now this activates G protein transducin, okay, which then activates an enzyme called cGMP phosphodiesterase. Okay, it activates cGMP phosphodiesterase. This is what is happening inside, okay, in the rod. And this enzyme then converts cGMP to 5-GMP. Okay, phosphodiesterase converts cGMP to 5-GMP. Now, like I've already told you, normal functioning of rods, for sodium channels to operate, you need cGMP. Now, if cGMP decrease and they get converted to 5-GMP, it is of no use for the sodium channels. So what happens? It closes. It closes, the sodium channels close. And what happens? Hyperpolarization begins to happen. That means a very negative potential is created in the nerve fiber. What is hyperpolarization? We already discussed, no, action potential. Okay, when it becomes very negative. Okay, more than the resting membrane potential also. Okay, this is hyperpolarization. So once sodium channels close, hyperpolarization happens in those rod nerve fibers. Okay, so that is why when light stimulus is given, hyperpolarization happens, not depolarization. Please don't confuse this. Okay, in nerve fibers, in rods and bones, hyperpolarization happens due to light stimulus. Okay, so closure of sodium channels happen, which causes hyperpolarization. Okay, and how that happens is through these reactions. Okay, so this is what's actually happening here. Okay, so that is a different thing. I'll come to that also. To go back to your, I hope you've understood rhodopsin. This is very important. This could be potential MCQ questions from here. Okay, regarding rhodopsin and how the breakdown of that causes any changes. Yeah. So here photoreceptors in the human eye are depolarized during darkness and become hyperpolarized in response to the light stimulus. Okay, this is actually the correct statement. If you didn't know that, now you know that, right? Now I want to discuss receptors do not produce graded potentials. Okay, actually receptors do produce graded potential. We saw the photochemistry of vision. That means we looked at what is happening in the nerve fiber, what are the different chemicals that are being formed when rhodopsin breaks down, and how sodium gated channels are closed, and open, and we saw all that part, right? But when the nerve impulse is traveling, it is not an action potential nerve impulse like we see in normal nerve fibers, in other nerve fibers. In these receptors, it behaves differently. So not all receptors produce an action potential, that all or none principle, that if a stimulus is given and if it crosses the threshold stimulus, then an action potential will be generated. It doesn't work that way here. Okay, here when hyperpolarization happens, it is based on the intensity of illumination. Okay, the strength of hyperpolarization is proportional to the strength of illumination. That means the amount of light that is entering the eye. Okay, so what are graded potentials? Receptors produce graded potential are called electrotonic conduction. It's also called electrotonic conduction. Okay, and it is a direct flow of electric current from the neuronal cytoplasm and nerve axons to the output synapses. Okay, so there is a direct flow. You see the rods, right? You see the structure of the rod in the synaptic body, nucleus over there, and the synaptic body over here, right? So nerve impulse is generated, right? And it immediately just passes based on the illumination. Okay, hyperpolarization will be based on the amount of illumination. This is not based on all or none principle where a threshold stimulus, you didn't see any threshold stimulus, right? You just saw the amount of light coming in, breakdown happened, metarhodopsin 2 was formed, and then eventually all the other series of reactions happened, the cGMP cycle that we saw. Okay, so the direct flow of electric current from the neuronal cytoplasm and nerve axon to the output synapses also is the same way. Okay, it's a direct flow of electric current. Erase this part. So in the outer segments of rods and cones, the synaptic bodies are excited by electrotonic conduction, which causes hyperpolarization. We saw that. Okay, so it's not all or none principle, it is by electrotonic conduction, the outer segment of the rods and cones. Okay, and this occurs to the same degree from the cytoplasm to the synaptic body. Okay, so the same amount of impulse is also goes down the axon to the cytoplasm to the synaptic body. Okay, it is not just in the outer segment. That same amount, that same degree or the same intensity of hyperpolarization or the signal or the electric impulse that is generated goes down to the axon and finally to the synaptic body. Okay, so similar process occurs when rods or cones activate bipolar cells or horizontal cells. So if you look at the structure of the retina, okay, so there are bipolar cells, there are horizontal cells. The same impulse, the same method occurs when rods or cones are transferring the impulse to bipolar cells or horizontal cells in the retina. Okay, this is called graded conduction. Okay, so this is what's actually happening inside the eye. Okay, please be careful. Okay, it is not just the action potential that we saw in, in the previous parts where I spoke about all or none principle. Action potential, stimulus is given and it has to cross the threshold stimulus. No, we didn't see any threshold stimulus here. The amount of light that enters, the degree of hyperpolarization will be that much. Okay, so the strength of hyperpolarization is proportional to the intensity of illumination. This is what's called graded potential. Okay, so this is also a very important topic, okay, to remember. It's actually a very good question because here we dealt with so many different topics which you were not aware of. Okay, it's very vaguely described in NCERT, but I have given you a very detailed approach towards it. If we go back to our question again. So photoreceptors in the human eye are depolarized during darkness and become hyperpolarized in response to light stimulus, and receptors do produce graded potentials. Okay, they do produce graded potentials. This is the right statement for this. So it was a very long question you learned. I hope you've learned something from this. A very long discussion. Let's move on to the next one. If you like, you can go back, re-watch this video, note it down in your notebooks. Okay, so question number 14. Photosensitive compound in human eye is made up of, okay, A. Opsin and retinol, B. Transducin and retinin, C. Guanosine and retinol, and D. Opsin and retinol. We already discussed this, okay? This appeared in NEET 1 2016. It's D. Opsin and retinol. Okay, answer is D. So in rods, a light sensitive pigment layer, rhodopsin or visual purple, is present. This is a combination of scotopsin and retinal or retinin, or it's called Levin-cis retinal, which is the light absorbing part. So in cones, a light sensitive pigment layer is called photopsin instead of scotopsin combined with retinal. Can you guess which is rod and cone here? Yeah, you see what you see as the outer segment. Okay, so this is rod, obviously from the structure you can see, and this is cone. Okay, so what rods and cones look like. It was a direct question, easy to answer. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Number 15. In mammalian eye, the fovea is the center of the visual field where this appeared in 2015. A. Only rods are present. B. More rods than cones are found. C. High density of cones occur but has no rods. D. Optic nerve leaves the eye. So, fovea is the center of the visual field where high density of cones occur but no rods. Answer is C. Let's go to the discussion. So, fovea occupies a space of 1 millimeter square and has a diameter of 0.3 mm, and this region is composed entirely of cones. Now the cones are different in the fovea region. Okay, so cones have long and slender bodies, okay, in the fovea, and blood vessels, ganglion cells, inner nuclear layer of cells, plexiform layers are displaced to one side. Hence this allows light to directly pass without any impediment. Okay, so now when you look at the structure of the eye, the retina, all these structure, the blood vessels, ganglion cells are all present, right? So when light enters, this actually reduces the intensity. Okay, this actually reduces the amount of light that it causes a lot of disturbance. Okay, the structures that are present there in the retina, it causes a lot of disturbance by the time the light actually hits the rods and cones and we finally see the image. But the fovea is structured in such a way, it's in the middle and it is composed mainly of cones only. There are no rods present there, so it gives you a very bright visual acuity, okay, to your vision. The ganglion cells, other nuclear layer of cells, plexiform layers, and all are pushed to the side over here. Okay, so you see a bend. Okay, you see a bend over here when you see when you see it under a microscope. You see a bend like that. So that means all the structures are pushed aside, and all you see is only cones. Just imagine if there's no impediment. Okay, there's no obstruction of light anywhere because of the nuclear layers and everything, and just directly hits the cones. It'll be very bright. Correct? It'll be very bright. What you see, the result that you see will be very bright. Because cones operate very well when there's bright light. So this is the advantage of having the fovea there. Okay, and also the cones are structurally different in the fovea. They have long and slender bodies. Okay, as compared to the normal cones. Okay, so this is another aspect or characteristic of fovea. Okay, that you know that all these other structures of the retina are pulled aside. Okay, and only direct light enters there. Okay, to answer your question, yeah, it has only cones and but has no rods. Yeah, that's the correct answer to this question. It's amazing to see that there's another world inside your eye, right? It's completely different. All right, so question number 16. A gymnast is able to balance his body upside down even in the total darkness because of, this appeared in 2015, was a cancelled exam. Okay. A. Tectorial membrane. B. Organ of Corti. C. Cochlea. D. Vestibular apparatus. Okay, so balance is usually controlled by vestibular apparatus. We've already seen the diagram before in this lecture, right? So your answer is D. Okay, so vestibular apparatus is a sensory organ for detecting sensations in equilibrium. The membranous labyrinth is the functional part of the apparatus and consists of cochlea, semicircular canals, utricle and saccule. The macula of the utricle, that's a receptor of the utricle, determines the orientation of the head in upright position. So when you are sitting in upright position, stationary position, okay, in upright stationary position, the macula of the utricle detects that. Macula of the saccule determines the orientation of the head in the lying down position. So when you're lying down on a bed or anywhere else, macula of the saccule determines that orientation. And eventually the semicircular ducts, the movement of the endolymph in the semicircular ducts causes the activation of ampulla, and in turn the crista ampullaris, which depolarizes or hyperpolarizes the nerves in the hair cells. Okay, depending on the movement of the hair cells, it will depolarize or hyperpolarize. Okay, this sends a signal to the CNS, the central nervous system, determining the change in rotation of head and the rate of change. Okay, so when you're jumping or running, you need to your body needs to be aware of where it is. Okay, needs to create a balance, right? So the semicircular ducts are responsible for any dynamic motion, like a gymnast would need that. Okay, when he or she is jumping or doing somersaults or anything like that. When you're stationary position, utricle and saccule do their job. It tells you the orientation. Okay, I'm sitting in one place, the head is upright, or when I'm lying down. Okay, my body is aware of that, my brain is aware of that. It sends a signal to the CNS that I'm lying down. Okay, you don't feel out of place or disoriented. Okay, but when you are jumping, like a gymnast would need that, or when a runner, an athlete, was running, or even if you're running, you just have to be an athlete. Okay, when you're running around, and also your spatial awareness, your orientation of the body is determined by that. Okay, so these structures help in understanding the orientation of your body, of your position. So the receptors in that vestibular apparatus help to determine that. Okay. So yeah, it says even in total darkness. Okay, so even if you're in a dark room and you are lying down upside down, I don't know why you would be doing that, but anyway, no person would be lying down upside down in a dark room, but whatever the situation may be, you are still aware of your spatial, your surroundings, your spatial arrangement. Okay, in the dark room, right? But that is because of the vestibular apparatus. Okay, clear? Let's move on. Okay, so question number 17. Which one of the following statements is not correct? Okay, this appeared in 2014 to find not correct statements. A. Retinal is the light absorbing portion of visual photopigments. In retina, the rods have the photopigment rhodopsin while cones have three different photopigments. Retinal is the derivative of vitamin C. D. Rhodopsin is a purplish red protein present in rods only. So clearly it is C. C is the incorrect statement. Retinal is a derivative of vitamin A. Easy? Answer is C. Let's go to the discussion. So retinal is a derivative of vitamin A. Now, one way of converting all trans retinol, you're familiar with all trans retinol and 11-cis retinol, okay? So all trans retinol to 11-cis retinol is as follows. So all trans retinol converts to all trans retinol, which is a form of vitamin A. Now, when we looked at the previous question where I spoke about the photochemistry of, rhodopsin, over there retinal isomerase was present, right? So what happens with retinal isomerase, it converted all trans retinol into 11-cis retinol, yeah. So that then combines with scotopsin, but scotopsin and 11-cis retinol can combine together, the configuration matches, and so it finally forms rhodopsin. But there's another way by which that all trans retinol can be converted to 11-cis retinol. Okay, and that is by converting all trans retinol to all trans retinol, okay, which is a form of vitamin A. Now, all trans retinol converts to 11-cis retinol in the presence of enzyme isomerase. Again, isomerase is used, which then converts to 11-cis retinol. Now, this 11-cis retinol then binds with scotopsin to form rhodopsin, right? Now, vitamin A is present in cytoplasm of rods and in the pigment layer of the retina, okay, and is then used to form new retinol when needed, okay. In case of excess retinol, it is converted back to vitamin A, okay. So, vitamin A is present in the cytoplasm of rods and in the pigment layer. So, that vitamin A is used to form retinol, okay, because retinol is a very important part of the rhodopsin. Okay, and then if there is excess retinol, then gets converted back to vitamin A. That's why vitamin A is a very important part of the eye, okay, of your vision. And that's why it's important that you have sources of vitamin A in your diet, because you don't want deficiency of vitamin A, right? To answer this question, I guess it was a simple question because the other were all correct. If you knew everything clearly, retinal is a light absorbing portion, rods have the photopigment rhodopsin, and purplish red protein is present in rods only. Yeah, clearly C was the incorrect answer, right? I mean, incorrect as in it is the correct answer, right? Retinal is the derivative of vitamin A. And now you know how vitamin A is important. Let's move to the next question. Okay, question number 18. Parts A, B, C, and D of the human eye are shown in the diagram. Select the option which gives correct identification along with its function characteristics. Okay, so you have A, B, C, and D. You have option A. This appeared in NEET 2013. Okay, you have option A, C, aqueous chamber. Here, this point to the aqueous chamber reflects the light which does not pass through the lens. Not really. B, D, choroid. Does point towards choroid. Its anterior part forms ciliary body. Yes. C, A, retina retina, whatever, contains photoreceptors, that is rods and cones. Yes, that's correct. D is B, blind spot has only few rods and cones. No, blind spot does not have any rods and cones. Here, if you notice, there are two correct answers. Because D does point towards choroid, and choroid, the posterior part has many blood vessels, but as you move towards the anterior part, it forms the ciliary body. So the anterior part forms ciliary body, which is correct. And A, retina contains photoreceptor, that is rods and cones. So according to me, there are two correct answers, B and C, according to this question. We go to the discussion. A is retina and contains rods and cones. Yeah. B is the blind spot, contains no rods and cones. C is aqueous chamber and contains a thin watery fluid called aqueous humor. D is choroid and contains blood vessels and is bluish in color. The posterior 2/3 is thin and becomes thick in the anterior 1/3 to form the ciliary body. So it's a structure from NCERT. See, the choroid is over here. The diagram was pointing towards choroid though. And this is the retina, which has rods and cones. Okay, and the anterior part of choroid forms a ciliary body. Comes thick over here. Okay, so clear? This was easy. Yeah, you had to know the diagram very well. For this, the anatomy of the eye. Okay, so we've come to the end of this video lecture, and I hope you've enjoyed today's video lecture, and I hope you've learned something new today. And please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to MG Neat Biology. And I'm available on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, so you can follow me there for more updates. And I'll see you in the next video lecture. Right? So bye.